is the virtual interface, but on either side of it, there are these other worlds. And you're in your world and I'm in my world, and we all have our own worlds behind us that are real physical worlds. And we also have the flat world in front of us, that's that holding space, that's the screen. And I think that's really what excites me a lot about working virtually. And on that project, I was there for seven years. The first 2 years in different schools, but for the last 5 years working with the same teacher in the same school. And that was really kind of important to the development of the work, our relationship, how we could work remotely together, which is very much a kind of proxy relationship where for artists who are used to being hands-on, you become a kind of somebody who gives instructions, somebody who holds puppet strings in some ways, but with a puppet that dances its own dance. So the control is something that you have to let go of in a very major way. We all found, I wasn't the only artist working on it, there were 10 of us all together at different times. Some of them working longer than I. One artist had been with the school for 10 years, and other artists coming on after I. There were dancers, musicians, visual artists, a whole mix of us all working in our resident schools. So I'm in Cork, and the school I was working with was in the other end of the country, near Belfast, in a little town called Donaghadee. It was a special school, which was unusual because all the other schools were primary schools, and this is a secondary school. So I was working with a dedicated art teacher in a secondary school who had classes coming in and out throughout the week, whereas the other schools had kind of the whole time with students in the same classroom. So there's quite a lot of differences going on in all the different environments. The interface that we had with the school was very controlled by the school system. So there were all those kind of procedures that you have to take care of, online activities. There were lots of firewalls everywhere. So we weren't able to think about the internet as this very kind of fluid space at all. It was quite kind of narrow in its focus as far as the World Wide Web went. So actually, the way it worked out was we were using the whiteboard in the classroom, the interactive whiteboard, which was hooked up to a program called Collaborate, which had a camera at either end. So my little photograph would be like a bit like the Zoom in one corner. We'd have the whiteboard, and we could change between the whiteboard and the cameras. And then the children would be on my screen. So pretty much like this. So with all of that, there was the technology that was really awkward. There was the sound that was really awkward. There was often a delay and these kind of chirping sounds in the background. There was often, I couldn't see a lot of the kids because they had a massive classroom, and I'd be looking at kind of bright windows with little silhouettes in front of them a lot of the time as the whole classroom. They could probably see me quite clearly, but again, I'm in my little world, they're in theirs, and we only know what we know from our bubbles. So all of those things kind of go into the pot of working in that environment. But with all of that, it was really exciting. And I guess the way that we managed all of those different realities was to have a kind of real coordinates, like the map making, that we actually had face-to-face real meetings at the beginning where I interacted. I went up to Donaghadee, I met the students, we went on a trip to a gallery always, and then we always went on a trip to this big park called Mount Stewart. So we had a bit of nature, a bit of art, and time together to just get to know each other. So from there, we were able to have these points that were kind of memories that were virtual spaces too, because they were in our imaginations. which related very well to the screen. Please stop me if I'm just rambling on. I'm trying to say quite a lot in a short space of time, and I'm not sure if it's all relevant. I just hope it is. So those real interactions, that physical sense was really important. And the first work I did with that school was all about layers. We'd been to see the David Hockney exhibition in the MAC, which was one of our regular coordinates. But obviously the exhibition's changed. And because we were looking at the virtual space and the idea of working with screens and layering and stripping back layers and adding on layers, we did that both in physical form as well as in virtual form. So we actually recreated a kind of Photoshop image using acetates and laminates and sticking things together and building them up in physical space, as well as moving things around in virtual space that we did from our separate nodes on the virtual screen in the middle. So we used to have these moments where the students would come up and talk to me because I couldn't really manage with the whole classroom. My teacher, Wendy, would work with the classroom on something that we'd discussed, and they'd be working away and they'd come up and visit me in an intimate environment at the screen and talk to me about their stuff. And this developed into a kind of dialogue that happened on the whiteboard where we were drawing on top of images and moving them around and talking about what we were interested in. And I think maybe now I can show you a little bit of some of those dialogues, so I'm not just talking about things. And I'm going to try this toggling of the screen to share the screen and hope it works. Yes. Okay, so forgive all of my windows at the moment. Can you see my screen? I'm just going to try and find these drawings. Okay, so I might show this. This was an idea of the layers working with actual rubbings. We'd made some rubbings at the Mount Stewart and then photographed them and brought them into different programs. So this is obviously using a kind of cut and paste on a computer screen from a physical image. So that was kind of a mixed thing. I want to and these are just other examples of what you do on the kind of virtual photograph with layering. But then we were using the whiteboard to do these drawings, and I was taking screenshots where we were having the drawings and making them into little animations. So I'm just going to find, this is one of the early ones. So this is Ben, one of the kids. I didn't say earlier on, but before we even met, Wendy sent me a big envelope in the post, a physical envelope of all of the children's self-portraits. So they'd all given me their self-portraits and I'd printed them out and put them on my desk. So I had a little line of their faces so I could remember who was who and from their avatar. This is Ben drawing himself and talking to me while we're playing with the layers on the whiteboard. So, and that's a screenshot of himself talking to me, and this is him doing this drawing while he's talking, and we're moving these spots around on the screen. So it gets into a little bit of an argument sometimes where I move something one way and he might move it back. I'll expand it, he'll shrink it, he'll put hair on, I'll move hair, and all of those different things happen in that dialogue. So we're layering up things from the real visit with drawings that we've done on top of them and talking about those kind of memories of what happened, what we found interesting, and all of those different. So there's just lots and lots of these. We would have had individual conversations, all of us. This was two of them working with me on this one. So the whiteboard became this place for those dialogues. And some of the times I didn't know what sans was. I think it was from a video game, a character in a video game that is all about the kids' own culture that really they gave me a glimpse into, but I didn't really go down that route with them. So this is a screenshot of me that they took of me in my studio, because when they were dressing up in their classroom or doing whatever the activity was, I was doing the same thing in my studio. So this was a day when we were making costumes, and I was making my things and they were making theirs, and we were sharing different snapshots on the computer of what we're doing and moving around those images. So everybody had their own language that they were developing. This is Lara. She liked the sequiny spots, and that was the kind of patterning that she was making. And I kept making little holes so I could see her in the pattern as she was putting them down. So there are all of those kind of things going on. Yeah, so that was quite interesting. Just going to see if I can find a picture.
Julie, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So all of these you're doing them on the smart board. Is that how?
Yeah.
So you're there. How are they seeing you? How did they screenshot you?
We have within the program Collaborate. Will I put my screen back on again, or is that? I'll just see if I can come back. Oh, sorry. No. Yeah. So let me see how that worked, because when we came up to the screen, we had a button that we could press to snapshot whatever the screen was looking at. And I would be on a big screen in their room, and they would be on a big screen in my room. And we could toggle pretty much like this between seeing each other's ends, the node ends, and seeing the whiteboard. So as we were shuffling things on the whiteboard, that was the main image, but a little image of ourselves would appear in the corner. It's a little bit hard to explain because I'm trying to remember how it all works.
So you could actually screenshot just that one little screen that comes up.
Yes, yeah. You could tell the
screen
camera which screen to look at.
Okay.
Within that program.
Yeah.
I got quite good at kind of finding my way around it and quite quick. So in a way I had a bit more of an advantage over those guys because they were concentrating on their drawing, and all of these things happened. But once all of the elements are there, you can drag them across and change them around.
And Julie, can I just ask, can you say a bit more about the avatars that you had at the beginning?
Yeah, I missed that bit out. Yeah, so they all sent up these drawings of themselves in a big envelope, and I had them on my desk. I cut them out, and they became really important because this shape here was the shape where our avatars could be us. So this was the real me, and this was the real them at each end of the node, and in the middle was the place where our other characters could be. And when I designed my character, I decided that I wanted it to look a little bit like me, but I wanted it to be a little bit like an animal too. So I gave it a tail, and it was just naturally accepted that I was Julie with the tail. And one of my the students was a house, and his avatar was this great big house that was moving around, and the others all looked more or less like them or somebody else.
Have you got any photographs?
Have I got photos? I think I put some in here. These are okay. So let me just get those up. I had two sides of me. That's those. And so these are kind of, let me toggle again. Can you see my desktop? Or can you see me? I'm not sure what you can see right now.
I can just see you.
Okay. So, okay. So can you see the characters here now?
Going now.
Yes. These, when they sent them to me, I scanned them into my scanner, and then I printed them on paper and I cut them out and I stuck them down. So this was one of the students, and she was Sophie. She was the same on the front and the back. So I didn't have a back view of her. So she had two. And then this was one of the other guys, and he was a kind of lizardy creature from some video game that probably the kids that you know might know, or they might be out of date by now. I don't know. This was, I think that was Ben, the house. This was William, who was never allowed to be Batman in the classroom because he had an obsession about him, but we indulged totally in his Batman fantasies. So that was Batman. This was my character. And this is me. I have a lot more photographs of me in my studio because that's what I had. And I didn't have the stuff. This is another kind of long distance thing, is that you don't get to control what the other the material that gets produced anywhere else in this classroom in the same way that you would if you were actually working physically. You wouldn't have your hands on it. So I don't have a lot of the material that happened in the classroom, but I do have the material that happened in my studio. So I was doing this kind of thing. These are the layers, and that's my character's front, and that's the other side of the character. These are the kids' characters, and they would have been the same front and back. So I would actually play with their characters within the layering that I was doing here and share that with them in the instructions part of the session. So I'd show them what I was doing in my studio and say, this is my character and I'm playing here, and this is an image from Mount Stuart that I'd traced over, and these are leaf patterns, and I'd show them all of the kind of procedures in getting to these places, and they would get in the classroom work with the teacher doing the physical stuff, spraying the paint and cutting out the laminates and pressing things down, and then we'd have the intimate conversations by the computer with photographs and digitized imagery. So the avatars became really important because they were physical things as well as virtual things that we could play with in our individual spaces, but also in the virtual space. So it was like putting ourselves into that play area that was the screen that had a physical element too. And I think that kind of, the whole idea of the proxy was really important in the virtual sessions, because in virtual life you can be anything, you can do anything, and that's the magic of it. And the other side of it is that you can have the physical element too in your hands in front of you. So that interaction was really quite fertile for both of us, I think, both ends. One thing I would say about working with the school and having the long-term relationship was I could come back and forward and see them in reality and talk to the teacher in between sessions and have that kind of continuity. Whereas the work that I'm doing with the Crawford Gallery at the moment is pretty much videos made to go online and then waiting for a response, like throwing a stone into a pool and waiting for the echo. So there isn't the same praxis that goes on in that, where you can say, okay, I'm trying this, test it, that worked, that didn't work, comes back with something really surprising or not, and then build on to the next thing. That doesn't happen since the COVID, because the groups I'm working with aren't groups. They're just people out there who look at the video and might or might not be doing it at home. They're getting 1,000 hits each, so it looks like they're being looked at, but we don't know. There's nothing coming back, and we've got a hashtag that we've invited people to upload their images to, which is really slow. There's not a lot of response to that. So I think that's one of the challenges that possibly we all have now with this sudden impact of isolation, is how to, beyond throwing the stone, to get the echo coming back. And even on the project that, this very nurtured project that lasted for 7 years, the virtual element that was the website, that was the place that was supposed to be a kind of stable diary, record, gallery, show place for all of the projects, was largely used by the artists to document their work and remember what they were doing week by week and show each other what they were doing. There was no take up, very little take up from the schools to upload their own, or the students to upload their own work. And that was a timetabling thing. The teachers didn't have time to do it. The students didn't have such easy access to be able to do it on their own behalf. And all of the protocols about using the internet were
Julie, can I ask a question? Just so the Crawford Gallery one is public groups, not school groups. Is that correct?
They're public. They're just the Crawford Gallery one would have come from Sunday workshops that I do with people normally in the gallery, and they're drop-in workshops. So families come, parents and kids, usually younger kids and young parents, but they can be anything from kind of 2 years old to 15, 16 years old. The children and the parents join in too. So it's pretty much a family hands-on session.
Can you show us from that work?
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
can.
I'll just get rid of some of these things. So I'm not sure. Are you looking at my screen at the moment, or are you looking at me?
I'm just conscious of your time, Julie, as well. But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure there'll be. I've got a feeling there are going to be quite a lot of questions. Probably.
Yeah. I'll just see. Okay. So I actually used quite a lot of my ideas from that we tested in Virtually There for these little animations for the Crawford. Using the avatar. Can you see my screen, or can you see me? Can you see me, or can you see the screen?
We can see you. Oh no,
Yeah.
sorry.
You can see me. Okay, I want to get you to see the screen. So, and I'm trying to find the folder that I put the videos for the Crawford into, and I think it's tucked behind there. Oh, that's Mount Stewart. Okay, sorry about this. Get there eventually. Okay, so now toggle the screen. So can you see that little video?
Yes.
Okay, so that the idea there was to make a sketchbook for each week and to have a different activity each week, and that was the week of the rubbings. So and oh, so this is what appeared then on the hashtag page to give a little bit of background to how they could actually put their rubbings into a sketchbook. And then an invitation to upload their rubbings and sketchbooks, which hasn't happened yet. We've had a couple, but not very many. And there's a different activity every week.
Julie, can I just ask a sort of more general question? Thank you for showing that absolutely lovely work, which I'm sure, I think people will be interested in, and that is, what are the positives and the negatives, I suppose, about working in this way in terms of your practice as an artist?
Okay.
Question, I know, but it's...
Well, okay. The positives are just to expect the unexpected. You really don't know what's going to happen, and the most fertile moments are the ones that surprise you, and we know that. But the negatives are very connected with that, because it's that lack of control that you just have to give up your idea that you can control what's going to happen, because you can't. The saddest part for me is that you can't actually get that immediate comeback. You can't put something out there and expect there to be something come back, which is the usual kind of call and response of collaborative work. Yeah, so I think that's this current situation. I find that quite kind of stultifying but challenging, and trying to figure out ways of getting around it, with teams of people and talks and what can we do situations. Yeah. Anything else about... I find that whole enmeshing of the virtual and the real very, very fertile. That the imagination can be put into a space that is tangible, and vice versa. It's a very reciprocal space, I think, for sharing imaginative projects. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does, and I wonder at this point if anybody has any questions to just throw them in.
Yeah, I'm interested in, well, I've got young kids myself, and what in their, I suppose in their eyes, maybe not so much our eyes, what is the art? Is it the art? Do they see the physical rubbings and that they're doing as the art, or do they see the end product as the art, or is that just document? Because we're so used to as artists document everything.
Yeah.
Is that part of the art, or is it just part of this white noise of endless images and photos and selfies and everything else, and does it matter?
Well, I used to think that it was all about the process, that the kids really, I mean, it is so much about the material and handling the materials and exploring the materials, but always and every single time there's a Sunday workshop on at the gallery, the kids want to take stuff home. They have to take stuff home. So the kind of talisman of something that they've made, whether... I think it is a talisman. I think it's like an amulet or something that is a remnant from the process that is invested with the kind of magic of the process. I think that's what it becomes. And I think it is important. I think the more I see it, I think the more they do enjoy the product. Yeah. But also the process of, everything has to... It's all the experience that gets put into that. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yeah. I'm just curious, like, is it, do they get as much satisfaction from that end? Like you talk about the hashtags and that, and, that response hasn't been all that, like, do they see that? Because I see them as artworks as well, and
Yeah.
but maybe they don't, or maybe they do. Maybe it's just part of that whole background
No.
of imagery.
I think maybe you're right with that part of the process isn't so exciting, is it? You know, you're there, you've got your hands on, you're getting dirty and messy, you're playing with stuff, and then you've got this thing that you've actually completed that has all of that investment in it, but then you don't really want to actually distribute it. I don't think children are so interested in that kind of dispersal in the end, are they?
That was a question that I had to Julie about, is there a way that kind of, when you're talking about call and response, that the response can become more magical?
Yeah.
And, you know, is there something, another element of, I know like some of the online work that's happening at the moment with groups, that it's, people are kind of collaging some of those responses together and then re-showing that collage as another kind of artwork for the participants to re-see, or they might want to share it with family elsewhere as another collaged element as part of the response. I just wonder whether the response can be, whether that response can become magical too.
Yeah, I think that's where the real presence has to be, like, because if it's how do you gather that response together? I mean, in our current situation where we're putting out stuff on screens and there's amazing stuff happening everywhere. It's all around us. I was in one of these Zoom meetings with the Forest schools this afternoon, and they're saying they're really frustrated because they work with the forest environment, and now it has to be translated to something that's the antithesis of what they've been doing. They've been making videos of their projects and trying to make them adaptable to flats where kids might be living rather than forests. So they're doing it on balconies or in living rooms. But there's an awful lot of it out there. There's enough out there not to be doing it yourself. But somebody made the point that if you're already working with people who you know, they really like to see you there. So that personal contact, I think, is where you can kind of make the thing escalate. But if you don't have the personal contact in the first place, then it's much harder to actually create that next stage of magic with an audience who don't really know you. They haven't had that memory of a time with you in a space. They haven't been going along that same kind of physical time with you, as well as the virtual time. So you're just another one of those screens, unless there has to be a way of kind of, I'm throwing this out there, there has to be a way, as you say, of making that part the next spoke on the wheel, to be a magical spoke.
I just wanted to make one comment too about what something that did make that brings something to those animations is the layering of art forms on art forms. So the music becomes very much a part of a visual experience. And I think that's a really something interesting that's kind of happening at the moment, that different art forms are crossing over to create whatever the experience is.
Yeah. There's been so much.
Can I just jump in and say, Julie, there are a couple of questions coming up in the chat column if you want to check in with those. Okay. And I could read them out if that would help. So questions, Ruth's asking what platforms people have used, what programs that are working successfully. And obviously Zoom is the one that a lot of people are working with. Schools can't. Angela's saying about Canvas, the TAS schools system, that it is highly unintuitive. So
collaborate too, totally clunky.
But it sounds as if you found some ways around that and found ways of using it imaginatively and creatively. So that would be interesting if anyone finds examples of Canvas being used in that way because as schools get themselves more organized, if any of us are working with schools, that will probably be the platform we'll have to use. And we've got a question asking what you use for your animations, what software you're using for your animations.
Okay.
And
Answer that one.
I hand that back to you. Just add in. It seems to me an answer to that question of, or it's not an answer, but possibly one avenue for answering that question of making something that's real in that virtual space. I just love the proxy idea and the avatars and that connection with the language of virtual, virtual gaming language, but somehow appropriating that into a handmade off-screen world, but then that mixing and, as you say, layering. But also I love the picture, which we haven't seen here but is on the ArtELIER website, of all your avatars of the class lined up on your studio desk. And there's something about that real presence there that seems quite a powerful way of making a connection, maybe.
Yeah. Clunky, yeah, the Collaborate was really clunky, but in the end, I think the clunkiness gave it its creativity. I mean, it's the same with all art forms, isn't it? Once you have parameters, those parameters help you to find creative solutions. So one thing I didn't say about the whiteboard that you might have with Canvas as well is that because it's projected onto the whiteboard in the classroom, the image is projected, you can also work between the projection and the whiteboard too. So there can be a whole kind of staging in the classroom using the light from the projected image as well. So there's lots of kind of and more layering and more spaces within that too, as well as the flat screen surface that's interactive. So you can open up those spaces within that.
Julie, we might see if anybody else is, I'm aware of time. Anybody got any other questions? If you want to just stick your hand up or.
I've just got, I loved, Julie, the stuff you were doing that was so interactive on the smart board. Have you ever done anything like that that doesn't involve a smart board? Can you do it on a normal computer screen?
They started off doing it on the iPads. So when we went to Mount Stewart, they took photographs of anything that interested them. They were doing rubbings and taking photographs and then bringing all those things back to the classroom. And then we were using, and I can't remember the software, but I can feed it back to Simon and Victoria. We were using a layering software. It wasn't Photoshop, it was something it was free. And we were just layering it up on the iPad. So they were getting very adept at using that kind of software themselves. And then for the animations, the little ones at the end, I use Stop Motion Studio. That's free, but if you get Stop Motion Pro, you can have more. It's a $5, I think, and on a phone. So just really, really small scale, nothing fancy. So
it'd be great to get a bit of a list of all those resources.
I'll try and it's going back a little bit with the iPads now, but and software changes so quickly. I think when I started with them, I just looked online and I found whatever I liked the best that was free, because the school wasn't going to pay for anything, and then we used that, whatever it was. But I'll dig it out and see if it's still the same.
Okay, thanks.
It's interesting to look back, Julie. You said about how the project started way back with multimedia maps, and that project was about putting artists into schools and really working with such basic technology, wasn't it? And it was actually when they were installing CD-ROMs in the schools. That's how long ago. And we felt that all this technology was there and nobody really knew how to do it at all. And it was down to you guys, you artists, who kind of just broke lots of the rules with it. And I think that is really important part of it, that there's well, I'm using it in a totally different way to the way it's designed to be used.
And it was usually the kids that actually brought it into that area, because it's whatever they were going to be interested in. You had 30 kids for the afternoon. they had to be doing something that was fun for them. So they led the way with all of the technology, I think.
So Julie,
Yeah.
have you got a provocation for us at the end of this session?
Yeah, I want you to think about this. And your proxies, an avatar that can inhabit this space, and also what happens at either end of those spaces as real spaces. So physical spaces with the virtual space with your avatar on it. Does that make sense?
I love the idea of us having our avatars here for future sessions. I think that would be very good. If there are no more questions, I'm going to let Julie get to bed because she's been an hour now with us nearly. So is there any final questions? No. Well, I think on behalf of all of us, thank you, Julie. Definitely a big thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
really great to see you and really good to see that work. And we'll put some of those links up on the ArtELIER site.
Okay.
And that's great. Thank you. You can stay with us or not. I'm sure you'll find some of the work that you'll see relevant. But we are recording this session too, everybody, if that's okay. And we will put that up online for other people who weren't able to make it today. And maybe look back, Julie, because I know a couple of things you were talking about are very relevant to both Kelly and Cherie's later presentations. So thank you very much.
Goodbye, everybody. Looking forward to seeing your avatars.
Well.